Roger Perron didn't believe in ghosts. Not till the night he saw his wife standing there, stiff as a corpse, staring at something he couldn't see. The lantern light flickered, throwing shadows long across the walls, but Carolyn didn't move, didn't blink. Then, in a voice that weren't quite her own, cold as a winter grave, she whispered, "She's here." The air in that house turned thick, like it had been holding its breath for centuries, waiting on them to come. The voices started soon after, calling out from the dark, slipping between the floorboards, breathing against the backs of their necks. The girls woke up screaming about whispers in their rooms. The stink of rotten flesh crept through the halls, and something unseen began pulling the blankets straight off their beds in the dead of night. The house at 1677 Round Top Road weren't just haunted. It was alive, it was hungry, and it had been waiting on 'em. Welcome to Kentucky Melodies, America's Scariest Stories, where we bring you ghostly legends, spooky haints, and bone-chilling tales from all over this great land. These stories will have you looking over your shoulder all night. So pull up a chair, dim them lights, and let's dive into the eerie and unexplained. Long before the Perrons ever set foot on that land, the ground had already soured, soaked through with blood, sorrow, and things best left forgotten. Built sometime in the 1700s, that house sat heavy on Arnold land, stretching wide across the countryside, yet never outrunning what lingered there. The earth beneath it carried a sickness, like a wound that refused to scab over. War had come and gone, leaving behind echoes of men dying with their mouths still open. Winters had crept in cruel, stealing the breath of little ones before they ever got to grow. And then there was the kind of dying folks didn't speak on. Bodies dragged out of the brook, men found hanging in the rafters, eyes bulging wide like they'd seen something they couldn't unsee. And in the midst of it all, there was Bathsheba Sherman. She didn't live on that land, but her name rotted into it just the same. The town women spoke of her in hushed tones, claiming she'd done things unnatural, that she'd offered up her own child to something dark and hungry. Said she bore the devil's mark, that her very breath could spoil milk, make crops wither, send livestock dropping stone dead. She passed like all folks do, but the ground didn't take her easy. Weren't no peace in her rest, just a name that wouldn't die, a shadow that stretched long after her body went cold. No law ever branded her a killer, but still, death followed her name like a stray dog that refused to leave. Folks tried to let the past lie, but some stains ain't meant to wash out. And whatever took root in that land, whatever curled itself round that house, it never did let go. When Roger and Carolyn Perron first laid eyes on that old farmhouse in 1971, it felt like the kind of place where a family could put down roots, where 5 little girls could run barefoot through the grass and fall asleep to the sound of crickets singing outside their windows. It was meant to be a fresh start, a quiet, simple life away from the world's troubles. But dreams don't last long in a place where the walls remember more than they should. At first, the strangeness came soft, like a whisper through the rafters. Doors that had been shut tight in the evening would be standing open by morning, their old hinges groaning like they was complaining about something. Things would go missing. A hairbrush here, a book there, only to turn up in places they had no business being. Carolyn started waking up with bruises, dark welts blooming along her arms and legs like she'd been gripped by hands that weren't there. The girls began murmuring amongst themselves about a woman in the shadows, a shape just beyond the candlelight, watching them when they thought no one else was. Sometimes, in the dead hush of night, voices would call out their names from empty rooms, pulling them from their sleep with an icy dread setting in their bones. Then the house quit pretending. The air turned foul, thick with the stench of rotten flesh, drifting through the halls with no source, no reason. The warmth of a fire or the summer sun didn't matter. The cold would roll in sudden-like, settle in their bones, the kind of chill that felt like someone was breathing right against the back of their necks. Carolyn started changing. Her days were spent poring over old records, digging into the history of the land, her hands shaken as she traced the name Bathsheba Sherman over and over again on yellowed pages. She became convinced that Bathsheba hadn't just died on that land. She was still there, watching, waiting, filled with a spite that stretched beyond the grave. Then came the night that broke her. She'd been sitting in the parlor, the glow of a single lamp stretching long shadows across the walls, when she felt it before she saw it. The air around her thickened, like something was pushing its way into the room. And then there it was, a woman, twisted and wrong, her skin sagging in places it shouldn't, her mouth pulled into a snarl, her eyes nothing but black, empty holes. Carolyn couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The thing leaned close, and its voice slid into her ear, soft as a lover's whisper but thick with venom. Leave or die. Roger found her there, curled up in the chair, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps, her hands clamped over her ears like she was trying to block out a sound that had already sunk its way too deep into her mind. Desperate, the Perrons reached out to Ed and Lorraine Warren, the ghost hunters folks had been whispering about for years, the ones who had seen things no God-fearing person ought to. The moment Lorraine stepped inside, she went pale. She told them flat out, something was there and it weren't friendly. What happened next would be written into the kind of history that don't fade. The seance started like any other, but it didn't take long for the house to turn against them. The air snapped tight, a pressure like a storm building just beneath the roof. Carolyn let out a shriek so raw, so inhuman, it rattled the glass in the windows. Then she was writhing on the floor, her body twisting in ways no human body should ever bend. The Warrens would later say she was possessed, just for a moment, just long enough for the thing inside her to make itself known, before it released her, leaving her crumpled and gasping on the hardwood like a rag doll someone had thrown aside. The Warrens told them they needed to leave, that the house wasn't going to stop, but the Perrons couldn't. They'd sunk too much into that place, had nowhere else to go, so they stayed, holding on, enduring nearly a decade of torment. By the time they finally left in 1980, they weren't the same family that had walked through that door 9 years before. They didn't talk much about what happened in that house, but even years later, when the wind howled just right, when the shadows stretched long across their bedroom walls, they could still hear it calling to them from the past, and they never did look back. After the Perrons packed up and left, leaving that old house to whatever ghosts still lingered inside, it changed hands more than a few times. Folks came and went, most of them refusing to stay long, though not all of them were willing to say why. Then came the Sutcliffes, a quiet sort that kept to themselves, tending to the house like it was any other home, like the past didn't carry no weight. They stayed nearly 40 years, long enough for folks to start wondering if maybe the house had settled, if maybe the things that stirred in the dark had gone quiet at last. But quiet don't always mean peace. The Sutcliffes would later say they never saw much out of the ordinary. Just little things, things easy enough to explain away. A door here or there that didn't stay shut, a whisper now and again that might have just been the wind. And sometimes, just before drifting off to sleep, they'd catch a shadow shifting in the corners of their vision. But by the time they turned to look, it'd be gone. Then, in 2019, the Heinzen family came along, and with them, the house woke up again. Corey and Jennifer Heinzen weren't like the others. They came looking for ghosts, and the house was more than happy to oblige. Cameras were set up in every corner, every hallway, every creaking doorway. And it didn't take long before they caught something watching from the shadows. They recorded voices that had no bodies to speak 'em, doors slamming shut with no hands to push 'em, the kind of things that don't leave room for doubt. The Heinzens swore the house was still very much alive, that whatever had made the Perrons' lives hell all them years ago was still there, still watching, still waiting. The house had just been biding its time. By 2013, the story of the Conjuring House had been whispered through dark hallways, scribbled in books, and spoken in hushed voices round campfires. But that year, it hit the big screen, and the world ain't never looked at that house the same since. The Conjuring brought the Perrons' nightmare to life, a tale loosely stitched together from their time in that cursed home. Directed by James Wan, the film wasn't just another ghost story. It dug its claws deep into folks' imaginations, pulling in millions at the box office and setting the stage for a billion-dollar franchise. And that was just the beginning. More movies followed, each one pulling deeper into the twisted world of hauntings, demons, and things that ain't supposed to walk this earth. 2016 saw The Conjuring 2, diving into another Warren case, another house where the past refused to stay buried. 2021 brought The Conjuring. The Devil Made Me Do It, stretching the franchise even further into the darkness. And, between all that, there came the Annabelle films, telling the tale of that cursed doll sitting behind glass, just waiting on some poor soul to let it loose. Even now, another Conjuring film looms on the horizon, stirring up speculation about what horrors might come next. But something happened in the wake of all them films. The house itself changed. Before, it was just an old farmhouse in Rhode Island. Its past known only to the folks who dared to dig deep enough. But now it was a pilgrimage site, drawing in ghost hunters, skeptics, thrill seekers, and folks who just wanted to stand in the shadow of something they weren't quite sure they believed in. They came to see if the stories were real, to test their courage, to hear the whispers for themselves. And whether they left convinced or not, one thing was for damn sure. Nobody walked away from the Conjuring House untouched. By 2022, a woman by the name of Jacqueline Nunez, a real estate developer out of Boston, laid down $1.525 million to claim the house as her own. But she didn't buy it to live in. She bought it for the ghosts. She aimed to keep the doors open, letting investigators and thrill seekers alike come wander through its halls, listening for the voices in the walls, waiting to see if the shadows might move for 'em. But a place like that don't change hands easy, and with new ownership, trouble came knocking right along with it. By the time 2024 rolled in, the Conjuring House weren't just haunted by spirits anymore. It was haunted by something worse. Accusations, resignations, legal fights, all of it spread like wildfire. The folks who'd worked closest to the house, the same investigators who once swore by its hauntings, walked away. They warned of something else stirring in the house now, but it weren't ghosts they was talking about. Words like harassment and erratic behavior started making the rounds. Lawsuits piled up. Talk of unpaid wages led to threats of taking things to court. Police got involved. Some even claimed Nunez was forced into hospitalization, though whether it was done out of concern or something darker, well, that depended on who you asked. By November of 2024, the Burrillville Town Council had had enough. They revoked the business license, effectively shutting the place down. No more ghost hunts, no more overnight stays, no more curious souls treading through them old wooden halls. But even after all that, Nunez refused to close the doors completely. She kept the bookings that were already set, kept telling folks that the spirits inside weren't done speaking just yet. And maybe she was right. Maybe the house never really needed a license to do what it does best, because long after the lawsuits have settled, long after the doors are shut for good, the legend of the Conjuring House will keep whispering, floating through the air like a voice from the dark, and it'll never go quiet. Times marched on, wearing down the trees, cracking the roads, and changing the faces of the folks who come and go. But the Conjuring House still stands, like it always has, unmoved, untouched by time, as if it's holding on to something the rest of the world forgot. The past don't fade here. It lingers, coiled up in the walls, woven into the floors, humming through the rafters like an old song nobody remembers the words to. The whispers still drift through the dark, sliding through doorways, hiding in corners, waiting on someone foolish enough to listen too close. And anyone who crosses that threshold don't leave the same, if they leave at all. Is the house truly haunted, or is it something worse? The weight of every fear-drenched breath, every shuddered prayer, every story whispered in candlelight, giving it a life all its own? Maybe it don't need ghosts to be what it is. Maybe the legend alone is enough. Now I gotta ask, what do you think? Do spirits linger long after their bodies have gone to dust? Can a house soak up pain, fear, and death till it breathes on its own? Or is it all just stories and shadows, tricks of the mind fed by the darkness? If you stepped inside, would you hear the whispers? Would you feel the cold grip of something unseen? Would you dare to spend a night inside, alone, listening to whatever still lingers in the dark? Once, if you had the nerve, you could book a stay inside the Conjuring House, step across its threshold, and face whatever still lurked in the dark. Folks came looking for ghosts, and the house never disappointed. But now, with all the turmoil and trouble, the doors have been forced shut, its website gone silent, and its future hanging in the balance. But the ghosts, they ain't gone. They're waiting in the empty halls, hiding in the corners where the lantern light don't reach. And the second that door opens again, the second some poor soul's let back inside, they'll be waiting to welcome 'em home. But be warned, some places don't just let you leave. Is the story really over? Or does the Conjuring House still wait, hungry for the next soul foolish enough to step inside? Maybe the ghosts are real. Maybe it's just shadows and stories. But what if it ain't? What if something is still watching, still whispering, still waiting for you? A house like this don't stay quiet for long, and neither do we. If you love tales of hauntings, folklore, and the things that go bump in the night, then you best stick with us at Kentucky Melody, where the stories never stop, and neither do the ghosts. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on social media, and check out our podcast for more spine-chilling tales from the shadows. But be careful. Some stories have a way of following you home. And just when you think you're safe, that's when you hear the whisper behind you.